Imagine a world where love letters were delivered by hand, where your social rank determined who you could marry, and where courtship was not just a matter of the heart, but of family strategy, economics, and even survival. Welcome to the world of medieval dating. In this video, we're taking you on a journey back in time to explore what dating was really like in the Middle Ages. Spoiler alert, Tinder didn't exist. Ghosting might have meant someone was literally dead, and romantic dinners, well, they were usually supervised by half the village. Let's dive in. In the modern world, dating is often about chemistry, shared values, or just a swipe right. But in medieval times, dating, if we can even call it that, was a very different beast. Most people didn't date in the way we think of it today. Marriage was the goal, and everything that led to it was tightly controlled by social customs, religion, and family expectations. For peasants and serfs, love often bloomed close to home, literally. Most people never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born, so options were limited, and familiar faces were the norm. You might meet someone in your village during a festival, a harvest, or while working in the fields together. These shared daily routines often gave rise to quiet connections. If you were lucky, you'd catch each other's eye at the weekly market or during church services, which doubled as rare social gatherings. And while courtship could include light flirting, playful teasing, or the exchange of small handmade gifts, it was almost never private. In tight-knit communities, every move was noticed. Romance was often a public process, closely observed and sometimes judged by family, neighbors, and the local priest. Love had to grow carefully under the watchful eyes of the entire village. In noble or aristocratic circles, however, love was much more complicated and sometimes completely absent from the equation. Marriages among the nobility were strategic. They were alliances meant to increase land, power, or wealth. The idea of marrying for love was considered foolish, even dangerous. A noblewoman, for example, might be betrothed at age 12 and married by 14. The man she married might be twice her age or older, and she may have met him only once before the wedding. But that doesn't mean romance didn't exist. In fact, the Middle Ages were obsessed with the idea of courtly love, a highly idealized and poetic form of love between a knight and a lady, usually one who was already married. Courtly love was the medieval version of a fantasy romance. Secret letters, longing glances, forbidden affection. It was never meant to lead to marriage. It was meant to inspire poetry, music, and stories. Think Lancelot and Guinevere. It was about yearning, not consummation. Knights were expected to prove their devotion by performing brave deeds or writing verses praising their lady's beauty. But this love was often symbolic, sometimes never even spoken aloud. Still, even within this rigid society, people found ways to flirt and fall in love. During local fairs or seasonal celebrations like May Day, young men and women could mingle more freely. Dancing, games, and communal meals offered rare opportunities to connect. One of the more curious customs was the apple toss, a flirtatious game where a young woman would throw an apple to a man she fancied. If he caught it and took a bite, it meant he felt the same. Sweet, right? But of course, in some places, that same gesture might also signal a promise of marriage, so you'd want to be careful where you throw your fruit. In rural communities, folk traditions played a big role in courtship. For example, in parts of medieval Germany and Scandinavia, there was a practice called bundling. Essentially, a young couple would be allowed to spend the night in the same bed fully clothed, sometimes even tied into cloth sacks to get to know each other. This might sound shocking, but it was overseen by parents and considered a practical way to determine compatibility. If they got along through the night, maybe they were a match. Another quirky custom was the love spoon, a tradition particularly strong in Wales. A man would carve an intricate wooden spoon and present it to the woman he wanted to court. The more detailed the design, the more serious his intent. If she accepted, it meant she was open to the idea of marriage. If not, well, he probably needed a new spoon. But let's not forget how much religion shaped every part of life, including love. The church had strict rules about when and how people could marry. Consanguinity laws, for instance, prevented people from marrying within several degrees of blood relation, even if the connection was through marriage, not birth. This was partly to prevent dynastic inbreeding, but also to give the church control over who could marry whom. Couples had to post banns public declarations of intent to marry weeks in advance, allowing time for any objections to be raised. The church also disapproved of secret marriages, but that didn't stop people from trying. In some regions, if a man and woman declared themselves married in front of witnesses and consummated the relationship, it was legally binding even without a priest. This led to many messy disputes and forced unions, especially among peasants. And let's talk about gifts. Giving a token of affection was common across all social classes, and in a world without texting or selfies, small objects often carried deep emotional weight. For nobles, a gift might be an embroidered handkerchief bearing a family crest, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, or even a carefully crafted love poem written in Latin, or the vernacular, a romantic gesture that also showed off one's education and refinement. Among peasants, the gestures were simpler but no less meaningful. A loaf of fresh bread, a bundle of fragrant herbs, or a hand-carved wooden trinket could speak volumes. A young man might spend hours whittling a comb or fashioning a ring from bone or copper objects that were not just tokens of love, but proof of skill and effort. In some regions, especially in parts of medieval Germany and England, such exchanges weren't just sweet, they carried legal weight. Giving and accepting a gift could be seen as a formal step toward betrothal, almost like an unofficial engagement. Interestingly, while women had fewer rights, they weren't always passive participants. Some women used their wit and charm to attract suitors, while others used legal loopholes to gain autonomy. For example, in medieval England, a woman could inherit property if she was unmarried, widowed, or had no brothers. This made some heiresses highly desirable and also gave them bargaining power in choosing a husband. And then there were the scandals. Not every love story ended with a wedding. Premarital sex was frowned upon, but still fairly common, especially among couples who were already betrothed and considered marriage-bound. If the woman became pregnant, the couple was often pressured or even forced to marry quickly to avoid shame or damage to the family's reputation. Adultery, especially for noble women, was far more serious. Being unfaithful could lead to harsh consequences, exile, imprisonment, or even execution in extreme cases. A single accusation could ruin a woman's standing and threaten her family's honor. Meanwhile, noblemen were held to a very different standard. Some openly maintained official mistresses, particularly in royal courts, where politics often ruled over personal morality. Still, despite the risks, affairs happened. Behind castle walls and within noble households, forbidden romances played out in secret, sometimes passionately, sometimes recklessly, but always under the shadow of danger. In some medieval towns, there were even love courts. Yes, you heard that right, courts of love. These were gatherings, often led by noblewomen, where romantic disputes were tried in mock court. Women would hear cases about broken hearts, unfaithful lovers, or questions of romantic honor. These courts didn't have legal power, but they reflected the intense cultural interest in love, loyalty, and passion. Now let's pause for a second. You might be wondering, was there LGBTQ+ love in medieval times? Surprisingly, yes, though it was often hidden. The church condemned same-sex relationships, and harsh punishments were on the books. But as with many things in history, what was official and what actually happened weren't always the same. In monastic communities, where people lived in close same-sex environments, emotional bonds sometimes grew into something deeper. Some letters between monks or nuns contain language filled with affection, longing, even romantic undertones. Among artists and poets, especially in the courts, expressions of same-sex desire could be found in literature, sometimes veiled in metaphor, sometimes more open. Fast-forwarding to the moment of marriage, it was often the families, not the lovers, who arranged everything. A bride's family might offer a dowry money, goods, or land to the groom's family. In return, the groom might provide a mourning gift, given to the bride the day after the wedding night. This was usually a token of security, especially in case the husband died early. It could be land, jewelry, or even livestock. Weddings themselves were community events. Everyone came, everyone drank, And yes, people kept a very close ear out for noises on the wedding night. In some places, newlyweds were even escorted to the bedchamber by cheering guests, and the consummation was considered a public milestone. Privacy? Not really a thing. Yet despite the rituals, the politics, and the pressure, love stories did bloom. There are records of couples defying their parents, eloping in secret, or writing desperate letters from opposite ends of the feudal spectrum. Some married for love, others found it after marriage. And while life in the Middle Ages was brutal and often short, the human desire for connection, romance, and partnership remained timeless. So, what was dating like in medieval times? It was strategic, ritualized, dangerous, poetic, sometimes bizarre, and always deeply human. Beneath the layers of armor and the weight of religious doctrine, people still yearned for love. They still risked rejection, longed for companionship, and cherished moments of connection, no matter how fleeting. And maybe, just maybe, they were a little like us after all.